Hi, I'm Lauren Cracken, and welcome to my podcast, Cracken's Corner. This is episode 3, OCD, Doubt on Steroids. So this week I was hoping to talk about OCD, as October 11th through the 17th is actually International OCD Awareness Week, and this is something that has greatly impacted my life and really the lives of everyone around me as a result. I heard a really good quote recently trying to describe living with OCD. It goes, "It's like you have two brains, a rational brain and an irrational brain, and they're constantly fighting." Emily Ford said that, and I thought, yeah, that hits it pretty much on the head. There was a nice little flow chart that I saw that goes, trigger. First, something triggers this reaction inside of you. For example, when I was in high school, a lot of times I would be set off by riding on the public buses on SEPTA because they're typically pretty dirty. So the trigger would be being in that environment, and then an intrusive thought. So they would start up with me going, "Oh my gosh, people around me are very likely sick." And then the catastrophic assessment comes where I go, people may be sick. And then it jumps to, oh my gosh, what if they get me sick? What if they're sick with something really contagious and really awful? I don't want to be sick. Oh my gosh, what do I do? What do I do? And I start obsessing about it, the condition that I'm in. And it moves into distress where you're actively worrying and you're actively very anxious and panicking and not sure what to do to get away from that feeling. And then it leads into the final step, which is a compulsion. So a lot of times what I would do when I came home from riding on the bus, especially during the wintertime when you're more likely to be around people who are presenting symptoms of being ill, I would go home and I would pour scalding hot water on my mouth just to feel better. To think somehow in my mind, I knew it was illogical, but in my brain I thought, well, hot water sanitizes, so maybe I could just sanitize that area around my mouth where I'm breathing, and that would cancel out the germs that I was exposed to. And of course, I knew that was irrational, but it didn't stop me from repeatedly doing that, even though it was literally hurting myself and a very bad thing to do. It kind of goes into my next point. One of the most unfortunate things about most people who have OCD, I saw a statistic a while ago, it was close to 98% of sufferers don't suffer from any kind of psychosis. So you're very likely to be aware that your thoughts are super strange, very irrational, but the fear is so intense. That feeling of a deer caught in the headlights, you're about to be hit by a truck coming at you, is so strong that you don't even care. You'll do whatever it takes to get a sense of relief, which is normally what you experience, at least temporarily, from performing your compulsions. I think because we are often so very aware that these thoughts are irrational, it leads to a lot of stigma and sadly, feeling very isolated, feeling crazy or weird, and it makes someone with OCD a lot less likely to seek help and to feel comfortable enough to talk to someone about it, which is horrible because anyone who's suffering really deserves to find somewhere they can get help and talk about their issues. One statistic I found actually stated that only about 35 to 40% of people with OCD even seek treatment, which is heartbreaking because it can be so devastating on your life and your happiness and your ability to do anything and enjoy anything in life anymore. Sadly, when I really think about our representation in the media at large, there are very few examples, and the ones that I can think of for the most part are only focused on contamination as that the primary issue. For example, Monk. Great show, actually something I really like. But it's a little problematic in the fact that it doesn't show anything else other than oh, he likes things to be clean and we're just a little quirky. And that's just not the case. It's a lot more involved in that. I guess it's just this idea that people just think oh, I'm so OCD because, like, I like to live in a house that's not a pigsty. Like, that's not what OCD is. That's not even close to what OCD is. Like, our suffering isn't a joke. It's a very real thing, and it comes in a lot of different forms besides, the most widely spoken about contamination OCD, which is what I experience myself. But in a lot of ways, I think there are even more painful ones out there, because ultimately OCD focuses on something that you hold dear to yourself, to your personality, to your values, and it attacks it, because this illness is all about doubt and doubting yourself and doubting what you're capable of and who you really are, and your identity at the core. Just to give a little bit of awareness to some of the other forms that it can take, because I feel like you never hear about this. A few examples of some of these subsets would be like harm OCD, where someone may become terrified that they'd harm a loved one or a stranger or even themselves, and then they suddenly start isolating and avoiding people and, feeling like they're a monster. Well, of course, like I said before, in reality, they would never actually do any of these things that they're afraid they would do. It's just the OCD giving them these intrusive thoughts and making them worry and question and doubt everything that they really believe in and that they know to be true of themselves. Especially in our climate now, I understand there's also what's known as HOCD, where a lot of people suffer with very extreme doubts about their sexuality. And I don't mean like normal questioning of like, oh, like, might I be into a guy or a girl or a non-binary person? I mean like serious doubts where you're crippled by it, and a proud gay person may suddenly start doubting themselves and go, oh my God, what if I'm actually not gay? What if I'm straight? Or like, and I've been living a lie. And all of a sudden your whole identity is questioned. Or maybe maybe you're straight and you think, oh my God, am I actually asexual? Am I actually gay? And it's not a healthy questioning. It's not part of the healthy journey that, most people experience in understanding themselves in regards to their sexuality. And it's crippling. I can't even begin to imagine the amount of pain you would feel if, many of these people are in committed relationships, and then all of a sudden they're thinking like, am I actually in love with this person? Am I living a lie? What am I going to do? Another form that it can take is religious OCD, where you may believe that you're offending God or whatever your concept of God is, and that you're going to hell, or that you're damned, or that your immortal soul is in trouble. And like they are just monsters in their minds. And these things are extremely troubling and upsetting, and pretty damn far away from the idea of worrying about a book being out of place. So I really wish we had more portrayal in our greater media of some of these aspects of OCD and the forms that it can take to maybe help someone who's experiencing this and has no idea that it's related to OCD. So I guess some basic statistics about it would be helpful. It's actually believed to affect about 1 to 3% of Americans. I've seen estimates of about 1 in 100 children being diagnosed with OCD. Technically, I would have been in that category. I was diagnosed at 17. The average age of onset is 19 years old, at least in America. Very often, you will see OCD as a comorbid condition, that is, with other conditions present, which makes it kind of harder to treat. You usually see it with things like depression or ADHD or eating disorders or a lot of tic disorders. That includes like Tourette's, trichotillomania, which is hair pulling, and skin picking disorders. They're extremely common, especially those. I know so many people that hit at least 2 of those categories. And some of the most effective treatment methods that they've found in studies, where they're normally the combination of cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as exposure and response prevention therapy with medication. Normally they recommend SSRIs and other antidepressants at a higher dosage to help alleviate the symptoms of OCD. So now is a bit of the hard part. I'm trying to talk about my experience with OCD just because it is very personal to share these things. But I hope that in doing this, I can give someone else a bit of insight and the courage to seek treatment if this is something that sounds familiar to you, and help you live a more fulfilling life and get some relief, because you deserve to live well. I was always, as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, very much an anxious kid, even without a diagnosis. There were signs early on that could have kind of pointed to OCD, like a lot of times we get a little bit obsessed with symmetry. I always enjoyed sorting things, like a lot. The idea of magical thinking, which is an interesting one, has to do with believing like certain things are lucky, like certain numbers are lucky, certain combinations are lucky. But it didn't really come out at full force until I was around 17. They say very often you have a genetic predisposition for obsessive compulsive disorder, which you may not even be aware of. I was the first person in my family, and as far as I know, the only person in my family to have OCD. So when I began presenting symptoms, they didn't know what was going on. They knew I was upset, and they knew that I was struggling a lot, but they couldn't figure out what was happening. A lot of times they say there's a trigger for what kind of sets it off if you are predisposed. And for me, that happened in the summer when I was about to start my sophomore, I guess it'd be junior year. Yeah, I was about to start junior year of high school. And I was talking over some things with a family member outside in the pool. We're kind of relaxed. And it kind of hit me, the reality of a situation I'd been through, which I will go into more detail on in a future episode. But I realized that I was a victim of sexual abuse and emotional abuse as a kid. And I guess because it happened when I was a child, I never put all the pieces together to figure out that that's what it was. I knew I was afraid, and I knew that I was traumatized, and I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to think about it. I avoided anything even remotely related to that situation. But I remember coming in and telling my parents and just breaking down crying, telling them everything, because they had no idea that this had happened to me. They were extremely vigilant parents. They believed that they had protected me from all this stuff. And, you know, they had to the best of their knowledge. But it's so easy for these things to go unseen. And within maybe 6 months of that reality hitting me, my OCD symptoms kind of started up from there. So that very likely brought it to the surface. The first incident I can really think of where I concretely began to experience OCD symptoms that I could point to was one night, rather late. I had like a pretty big meal, and I couldn't sleep. But it wasn't like a normal, like, oh, I'm having a little trouble going to sleep tonight. Like, my thoughts were racing, and I felt like there was an elephant sitting on my chest. Like, I could hardly breathe. So then I began to catastrophize in my mind, going, oh my God, am I having a heart attack? Have I been poisoned? Was there something wrong with my food? And just, freaking out. So thank God, my parents took me to the hospital. I went to the ER, and they ran a bunch of tests, and I was a little dehydrated, which is like nothing. But I had some kind of indigestion, but primarily that feeling in my chest was costochondritis, which I believe is the inflammation of the chest wall. So it can mimic the symptoms of a heart attack. So after that happened to me and I came home from the hospital, well, in my logical brain, I knew that those things were the cause. After that, I started to have a lot of trouble with the idea of eating late at night, because then I thought, oh my God, that could happen to me again. Like, What if there's something wrong with my food? What if I have to go back to the hospital? I could die. Like, these things just start popping into your head, and they're so upsetting, you'll do anything to avoid that chain of thought. Again, so after that happened, I started to kind of get rules in my head about, like, don't eat too late, really watch what's in your food. Make sure you're, not eating too much or not eating things that could cause a problem, especially at night, because my anxiety would spike whenever I have any kind of issue with it at night for some reason, and it's just a lot worse. I started to become hyper-vigilant about being clean and sanitary all the time, to the point where my hands were starting to bleed because I was washing them so vigorously. And I would be cooking meals extensively and then just think I saw something in them and throw the whole thing out and just scrap the whole thing because I was so afraid of feeling like something was wrong. And my parents didn't really know what was happening with me, but they were worried about me, so they took me to see my first psychologist, Dr. B, and he was great. I got very lucky, actually, that I had a good one straight on. Sometimes it can be a little hard for people to find a good therapeutic match for them. It's all about finding someone who has experience with whatever you're dealing with and kind of has a compatible personality and therapeutic approach to what you need and what works for you. I started to experience more of those intrusive thoughts late at night where I couldn't sleep. I'd get disturbing images and upsetting thoughts and sounds and things like going in my brain. It was like my brain couldn't shut off. So beginning therapy was really helpful to me and something I can't recommend enough for people. So my primary psychologist actually really helped me a lot. His approach was mostly cognitive behavioral therapy, which is generally like one of the best approaches for treating OCD. And eventually he got me to take Luvox, which is an SSRI, which was actually very helpful in helping to decrease those intrusive thoughts and to give me a sense of peace and strength that when those thoughts would come up, I started to get the motivation and believe that I could challenge them and I could fight against them. I learned some relaxation techniques and how to challenge those thoughts and like think about like rationally, okay, like if I'm on this bus and there's people around me that are sick, have common sense. Don't stand next to somebody who's coughing, for example. Things like that. But it's very unlikely statistically that I'm going to die because I'm next to someone with a cold or even with the flu. And of course now in our current environment with this pandemic going on, I feel like everyone's a little bit more aware of things like that. And for the better, we are, for the most part, taking common sense precautions and washing our hands and staying further away from people and isolating ourselves when we think we might have something. But even just in ordinary life, to kind of relax a bit more and say, well, you know what? I'm going to challenge myself today. He convinced me to start fighting it. And I did, slowly, where I'd ride on that bus and I'd be having these thoughts and panicking and wanting to go home so badly to burn away that feeling of fear. And he said, well, maybe next time, instead of having scalding hot water, just have warm water. It's not going to hurt you. And see if that makes you feel better. And if you can tolerate that. And so I did. I'd go home. I did that. And, I wasn't always successful in doing what I set out to do. But when I did, I started to realize, okay, the anxiety is peaking. And now I can feel it slowly start to taper off. And then the next time, once you kind of learn to do that, going from warm to cold water. So, like, okay, I'll do that. Started to do that, and same thing. I could feel it peak and then plateau and then kind of ease off. And before I knew it, I could ride on a bus without feeling the need to do that anymore. It was extremely effective for me. It was hard and it took a long time, but it was very important and rewarding that I could do that. And that's just one example, but it's an easy one to explain. I was lucky enough at the time that I was really around 2007, 2008, in that pocket of time, there were a lot of really good online resources of support groups for people with mental illness and with specific issues like that. So I found a really good forum, and I made a lot of friends with people around the world of different ages and sexes and orientations and religions and walks of life, really all around. And they were all struggling with the same thing that I was. And it was great to find that kind of sense of community where you knew that other people understood how you felt, even if you didn't have the exact same issues. I made friends with artists and musicians and martial arts instructors, students, scholars, parents, people from all these different situations. And they really helped me to empower myself to keep fighting this and gave me the strength to know that things can get better, because we were all at different points in our journey in fighting this, but we could find a way to feel less alone in this very isolating sort of diagnosis. Like, one of my oldest friends from there, Mikhail, is my dear Russian comrade. I refer to him as extremely intelligent person, like polyglot, speaks 5 languages, insanely gifted academically, and speaks English better than most people I know who were born native English speakers. But I'm so glad that I met him from there, and I met a lot of good people, and that we've still been able to keep in touch and support each other through this throughout our lives. So now I guess I would just like to give some advice, I guess, really, for if you believe you have OCD, or if you know someone who thinks they may have it, to realize that these upsetting and intrusive thoughts, whatever they may be, however they may relate to your life, they aren't who you are. They're lies. They're not true. To realize that you are not your thoughts, as hard as that can be to understand, especially when they're upsetting. And that we are considered neurodivergent, which is kind of an interesting group to be part of. It just basically means that our brains are configured differently than people without these conditions. And as a result, we may have more trouble in mastering soft skills, especially social skills. This includes people with autism, people with Asperger's, people with ADHD, epilepsy, and a whole lot of other interesting conditions. So it's okay to be a little more patient with yourself and with your loved ones, because we're just a little different, and that's okay. We still deserve to be treated with respect and to find ways to make our lives more fulfilling and to pursue our dreams, whatever they may be. And I think the key with understanding OCD is that the primary adversary that you're dealing with in this is really your own self-doubt, and that seeking professional help and really going for it and deciding you're going to fight this is the best way to treat it. And it's never going to completely go away. I don't want to give this idea that it can be cured, because it's not. It can't. It's a chronic thing. It's part of the way your brain is wired. It's literally wired differently than people who don't have it. So it's learning to live with it and learning to control it and face that beast inside of you, and to turn it into something that you can control and not allow it to control you. Learning that sense of self-mastery is extremely important. There may be days when it's worse or better, especially when you experience major stresses in life. When your life changes in a big, significant way, it's likely to flare up. And then when things get better, it's likely to ease up, and you may even feel like you don't have it sometimes. But even if it's still there, learning that you can live with this, you can fight this, and you can control this. I wanted to leave a few resources for people in case you have it, or you know someone who may have it and you want to learn more. The International OCD Foundation's website is a great place to start, iocdf.org. Have a whole lot of different groups and educational things to help with dealing with this. I'd also recommend, it's kind of old now, But the OCD Project was a series on VH1. It was actually a reality series revolving around a few people who had very severe cases of OCD and how it's actually treated, showing you that firsthand. Now, given this is a very intense show to watch, it is, of course, going to be more sensationalized because it's for TV and it's VH1, but it's still a good resource just to get an idea of what it's actually like for people with severe OCD to try to go through their lives every day. And a few songs, there's always a few things that I always thought of OCD with, like Leave Me Alone by NF. Excellent song. He actually has OCD himself, so he knows how to talk about it in a way that's a little more poetic and beautifully explain it. And of course, A Quiet Mind by Blue October. It's another favorite of mine. Not quite as direct, but still really explains a bit of that feeling of what you're dealing with when you're trapped in those states. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in again. I'm sorry this one was a bit different from the normal routine, but I felt like I had to say something because I've been dealing with this for so long, and I'd really like to be an advocate for people with mental health disorders to help us feel empowered enough to take control of our lives and seek help, because everyone deserves to find their own happiness and peace. Please feel free to share this with anyone who you think might benefit from it. Happy OCD week. It's a shame I don't have anything that's teal, because that is our awareness color, is teal. Maybe someday I'll get a nice shirt for that. But yeah, just to be aware that we exist. We're part of this world too, and we need a little more kindness and understanding in that, to understand what we're dealing with. You can write to us directly with your comments, your questions, give some advice, ask for some advice, anything like that, with Cracken's Corner Podcast at gmail.com. We do check it. I try to check it at least a few times a week, and it just really makes me happy to know that I can put something out into this world that might help somebody and enable more understanding, especially in our current world where there's a lot of misunderstanding. And I'd like to thank you for listening to me today. I hope you have a great day. I hope your week is fantastic, and I will see you on the next podcast. Bye.